A few years back, if I told my friends, come, let's try and install Docker, most of them would actually run away. Why? Because installing Docker a few years back was really, really tough. But I would say in the last couple of years, there has been a lot of improvement in the installation of Docker, and the process now is pretty simple. Installing Docker on most of the operating systems should really be a cakewalk. Go ahead and search for Docker install in your favorite search engine, and this should be the first result you should see. You can click that in, and over here you should see instructions to install Docker Desktop. Whether you're using Linux, Mac, or Windows, the best way to install Docker is to use Docker Desktop. As it says in here, Docker Desktop helps you build, share, and run containers easily on Mac, Windows, and Linux. I'll open up the instructions for each of the platforms in separate tabs. The first one is Linux, the second one is Mac OS, and the third one is Windows 10. The minimum version which is supported by Docker Desktop when it comes to Windows is Windows 10. If you're using Windows 7, then you would need to install something called Docker Toolbox. On Windows, all that you need to do is to download this installation file, and you can scroll down and follow the instructions which are present in here. These are the instructions which help you to install Docker Desktop on Windows. So you need to download that, and you need to double click the installer to run the installer. Make sure that you give it the right permissions. Take the default for almost everything and go ahead and install it. One of the most important things is to ensure that you are using an admin account to do the installation. So make sure that you are installing it on Windows using your admin ID. One of the important things to remember when it comes to Windows is that Docker Desktop is not automatically started up. So what I would recommend you to do is to install Docker Desktop, restart your machine, and then go ahead and pick up Docker Desktop from the start menu. If you have any problems with installing Docker Desktop on Windows, you can scroll down, and there is also a troubleshooting guide in here. So that's Windows. If you're on Mac, you have two downloadables which are present. One is Mac with Intel chip and Mac with Apple chip. If you're using a Mac from 2021 or 2022, most probably you're using Mac with Apple chip. You need this specific installation. For older versions of Mac, you might be using an Intel chip, and that's where you would need this specific one. How do you find out? Go over here, go to About This Mac, and see what's in here. You can see that I'm using a Intel Core i5 processor. Pretty old one actually, but this is my favorite, and I've been using it for a few years now. If you're having a Mac with Apple chip, you should see Apple in here, and go ahead and download the Apple installation thing from here. Installing on Mac should be pretty simple. You just need to double click the docker.dmg file. It will bring up the Docker app. You can drag and drop it into applications and double click the docker.app from the apps. You might also see a Docker subscription service agreement window where you need to accept to the terms of use. And the last operating system, Linux. All the instructions for Linux are present in here. You can see that Docker provides .deb and .rpm packages for Ubuntu, Debian, and Fedora as well. So the detailed instructions for installation are present in here. So go ahead and follow the instructions for your respective operating system and install Docker. Make sure that you launch Docker up, and if you go to the command prompt or terminal or PowerShell and type in Docker -- version, you should see one of the latest versions of Docker. We always try and ensure that the course supports the latest version of Docker. So go ahead, use the latest version of Docker, get it installed, get it ready, and I'll see you in the next step.